All right, I'm going to try to run through a top 10 that makes sense. Right now it's week 2 and it doesn't make sense. And this is with the caveat that LSU and Florida State haven't played yet. Clemson and Georgia Tech haven't played yet. So if either of those two games give us information that messes this up, then so what? It's Saturday night, and it's late. So number one, I've got Georgia, and there's going to be some people mad about this because in their mind, Alabama's number one. Alabama won 55-0. Alabama shouldn't drop. But Alabama's number one coming out of August, where we had no information. Everything is hypothetical. Oregon was also number 11 on that list, and Oregon is nowhere near the 11th best team in the country. I will say this, Josh, if Alabama goes on the road and handles their business against a Texas team that I expect to be improved this year, I'm probably going to move Alabama back up to number one because I really do think that Oregon is terrible, but I also think Georgia is that good. I've got Bama at number 2. These are 1A, 1B for me right now. The one thing I will say, so Alabama's defense, I think, may be one of the best Saban's ever had. At least I know I saw something the other day that said they're the most senior laden, the most experienced defense he's ever had. They have the potential to be amazing. They're really good in the secondary. They've finally got a decent linebacker core. They've had some issues there for a while. So I think the defense is better than it's been in a while. And the wide receivers didn't take a step back like I thought that they might. But Bryce Young looked a little shaky in the red zone tonight, based on what I saw. So that's why I've got them at number 2. I've got Ohio State number 3. I still think, like you, I think it's what you said was perfect. A- team, C+ performance. I don't think Notre Dame is terrible. Actually, I moved them into my top 10. I don't think they're a terrible team, though. So I think they're actually better than maybe we had anticipated coming into this season. So I'm okay with Ohio State number 3. Clemson at number 4 is more of a potential pick than anything else. Clemson might suck this year. They could be a 5-loss team because they almost were last year, and I'm glad to move them out if they prove me wrong there. Michigan number 5. Michigan handled their business today. So it's one of those things where I think I had them at 5 last week. They're not going to move up. They're not going to move down. Nothing about them gave me new information because they were playing Colorado State. I need to see them play somebody, and unfortunately, I don't think they play anybody for a month. I've got USC at number 6. They played Rice today. It's hard to know, and I think it was like 66-14 or something. But I noticed that Addison wasn't the top receiver. Williams ran the ball a good bit. It seemed like they were comfortable with Lincoln Riley, and they didn't do the like new coach, new regime, ugly, start out of the gate thing. So got a decently talented roster, and I think they're going to win a lot of games in the Pac-12. If I had to pick them playing Utah today, I'd probably pick USC. Oklahoma number 7. They also handled their business today. I'm a little concerned that they don't have a lot of depth, and the season might take its toll on them. Florida number 8. And look, I think that when things shake out based on how people normally rank, meaning if you have losses, you drop. If you win, you go up. Florida's going to end up 15-20. I think they're a decent team, a good team that's got a tough schedule, and it's going to take its toll on their win-loss record. But to me, that doesn't mean they're not the 8th best team in the country, 9th best team in the country. Right now, if you don't have to get into their depth, Florida is really good. My concern is at quarterback. I like Anthony Richardson as a runner. I still don't know that he's comfortable running an actual offense yet. He might be another year away. Notre Dame number 9. And look, this is a situation people get mad at us all the time. I will move you up if you lose a game. All the people that are going to be mad about us having Notre Dame ranked where we have them, because you might have them too, need to explain then where they have Ohio State. Because if you have Ohio State in the top 5 right now, and Notre Dame went in there and played blow for blow with them for 3.5 quarters on the road, then you can't tell me Notre Dame isn't a top 10 team. And right now, if you're looking at the field, who else are you going to put in there? NC State, they almost lost to ECU. Like, there's a lot of teams out there. North Carolina's 2-0, but by the skin of their teeth. I don't know who else she put up there. I moved out Oklahoma State. Scored a ton of points. They were in my top 10 last week, 58 points. Spencer Sanders looked amazing. He's, I think, coming into his own, but they gave up 44 to Central Michigan. And look, a lot of that was garbage time points. But that speaks to depth. And number 10, I'm replacing Oklahoma State with a Baylor team that I know nothing about, but I know they're well coached. And I think that we're going to have another top 10 team from the Big 12. And if it's not Oklahoma State, then it's going to be Baylor. I think it's going to be between those two teams for that other spot. That's my top 10, Josh. I'll shut up. I'll go on mute, have a sip of my drink, and let you run with it.
My top 10 in a lot of ways isn't going to look too different and not a huge shift from last week. My number one is still Alabama. Defensively, they didn't really allow anything, at least the early part of the game, which is probably the only time the starters played that I saw. Their defense looked absolutely dominant, a lot more consistent than we have seen. And Utah State is obviously a G5 team that isn't going to be the same sort of threat as Oregon, but they're not a bad G5 team. They're actually quite a good one. And they did sort of play around with them the way you would expect a number one team to play. So I have no reason to drop them, point being. Number two is Georgia. Clearly cemented themselves as either being number two or number one. I am still not 100% sold on Oregon, given kind of how things played out relative to what I researched on them. I'm kind of worried that things I saw as strengths had more to do with the other side of the ball being a weakness in like their spring game. We'll see. For example, the DBs struggled a lot in the spring game. I thought the receivers were playing well. I think it may be that the receivers are more average than I realized, and the DBs or the back seven is really bad. We'll have to find out. That's the difficulty of ranking week one. But certainly there was nothing to criticize from Georgia, and they played with them like they were air. So it was a dominant performance. Georgia's number two. I keep Ohio State at number three. I don't think putting away Notre Dame 24-10 was anything to be ashamed of. I think Notre Dame more than likely, and then I'll go ahead and sort of tease, they're not going to make my top 10, but they would make my top 15. I think they're right on the cusp of that, which is where I had them preseason. I don't think they're number 5, number 6 team. I haven't really understood why they were ranked that high, given where the roster's at. You can see that they have good pieces. You can see they have a good defense. They just don't have a lot of explosion offensively, and that was really apparent. My number 4 team is Michigan. I thought they were extremely impressive. When they had their starters in the game, Colorado State could not block them. And the biggest concern was that they lose Hutchinson, and then maybe they take this step back from the front seven being less disruptive. And what I saw was absolutely no indication of that. I saw a team that looks like they're going to be as not only aggressive, but as effective in their aggressiveness as they were last year. And have every reason to think their offense could be as good or better than they were last year. So I have Michigan number 4. Number 5 is Clemson. We haven't seen Clemson play, so we'll see what they look like against Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech still in complete, utter overhaul mode from the triple option. Don't know if it's going to be a contest. So it'll take a while to see. But even last year against teams like Georgia Tech, the offense looked inept. I think the defense is going to be phenomenal. I just want to see if the offense is actually going to be merely good. And if they are average to good, this is a top 4 team at Clemson. They would probably pass Michigan even. The potential for defense on that team is so good and so high. But I need to see something out of the offense. Next up for me, number 6 is Oklahoma. Oklahoma took care of business. They looked a lot. There's only so much you could take away from that game, but they were dominant. It looks offensively like they've kind of gotten all their stuff together. Gabriel was very effective. Not much more to say at this point. We're recording this Saturday night. I didn't get the chance to watch that game in detail, but I did flip through and sort of keep an eye on it. Baylor is my next at number 7. Now, Baylor didn't have a quality opponent, so they're just sort of staying pat where they were from last week. I'm going to keep them in that slot, sort of sitting there with Florida. And this is, I'll go ahead and tell you, for me, it's Baylor at 7, Florida at 8, USC at 9, Utah at 10. And this group, really Oklahoma down to Utah, it starts to get into the mash of teams that I have a really hard time sorting out. We often talk about the fact that if you play a really close game, I'm not going to really punish you a ton. That's why Utah for me is sitting at number 10. Baylor, I assume, is probably better than Oklahoma State, probably similar to Oklahoma, 7, close to Oklahoma. Haven't seen enough to move them down any further. Florida showed why I had them a top 10 team, because I had a lot of belief in that roster. Anthony Richardson, I thought in the spring game looked tremendously better than the guy that I was very critical of early last year. I know people say that they made a mistake by not starting him all last year. I disagree. He was not comfortable in Mullen's offense, and you can't just like magically snap your fingers and make that go away. He didn't make good reads. He didn't make good decisions. He didn't understand the offense. And what I saw in the spring game was an offensive scheme that was much better suited for him, and two, a player that much better understood that scheme. That showed up today, and he knows where his strengths are, and the coaching staff plays to his strengths enough to be successful. And defensively, they're just a lot better. USC, I have them number 9. Again, it's hard to take away much of anything from Rice, but the defense looked pretty darn good. Rice is a horrible team, but their defense looked terrible last year, so any sort of a good performance is good. They did give up a lot on the ground, but at least the secondary was very active. Offensively, they look like they're going to be an explosive Lincoln Riley team. We'll see how that plays out. And number 10 for me is Utah. In our preview, and there's some, I think most people agreed with it, but there were some people that scoffed at this idea that we said, look, Utah hasn't played in Oregon at Eugene since 2017. And there really isn't any other environment, I think, in the Pac-12 that could remotely compare to playing in the swamp. I think it did affect Utah. There were several times they had false starts or formational penalties or delay of games that were probably largely due to crowd noise.
And they also threw a stressful interception at the end of the game.
Right. I think if Utah played that game at Utah, I think they probably win. So I'm going to put Florida ahead because they did win head-to-head. So I'm going to, with the way I always evaluate it, I always say, if I played your schedule and you played mine, what would your outcome look like and what would mine look like? That's how I do it, right? So it's wins and losses matter. If you lose a game, I'm going to assume you lose it every time. But I'm going to compare it and say, okay, you lost 3 games in the SEC. One of them was a stupid loss to Mississippi State. If I took USC and made them play that schedule, how would it turn out, right? And if they're if they're having stupid losses to Cal, I'm going to think they're going to lose to Mississippi State and somebody else. So with Utah, I give Florida credit for the win, but I also really give a lot of edge to the fact that, hey, I think this game came down to who had home field advantage. And I think Utah's a very closely paired team. So for me, with week 1, really having barely more information we had last week, because so many teams played an FCS opponent or somebody that was greatly overmatched, that's where my top 10 is. It looks a lot like it did last week. And honestly, I feel pretty pleased with it because my top 10 does look a lot like it did last week. So I don't know if that says something more about the games that were played or more about the fact that a lot of teams kind of are who we thought they were. And for me to have Florida in the top 10, I think was, if I get one kudos from week 0, I think that one's it.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people are going to, a lot of people killed us for not having Utah in our top 10 and killed us for having Florida in our top 10. But those same people weren't taking the 3 points. If they're so far apart, then why was it Utah only a 3-point favorite?